I got the amazing opportunity to visit Bamberg, Germany some time ago, and I absolutely fell head over heels for the regionally famous Rauchbier. I especially love the Rauchmarzen from Schlenkerla and decided to try to brew my own version, but being American, I wanted to give it a bit of a twist by conditioning it on some Jack Daniel's oak cubes. This beer was going to be a bit of a challenge for me because I have never brewed a lager solo before and I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, and I also wanted to try smoking my own malts for the first time, so let's get into my attempt. So the first thing we had to do is prep ourselves for the malt smoking process. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into this process because it was extremely long, so if you're interested, I posted a second video describing how I go about smoking my own malts, but I'm still going to give you the highlights here, so don't worry. Trying to stay thematic, I found these bags of charcoal and oak cubes made from Jack Daniel's whiskey barrels. Supposedly, they help infuse whatever it is you're smoking with oaky whiskey notes. I'm not sure how accurate that is or how much of a gimmick it is, but the cubes certainly smelled like Jack. So I decided that I would actually re-soak these cubes in whiskey and use some for smoking and use some for the actual conditioning phase to provide a little bit more of a whiskey punch in the final product. And to practice good smoking technique, I filled a little spray bottle full of Jack Daniel's whiskey. It's good technique because the whole entire smoking process is incredibly dry, and you gotta have some type of hydration or rehydration to be able to prevent things from burning too quickly. And that's especially pertinent when you're smoking malt because it's already so dry as is and it's so easy to burn them. So my idea was spray them down with the whiskey. It's wet enough that it's going to be able to keep the malt from burning so quickly or so easily, but it also has a big flavor punch that would be able to continually infuse the malt with the whiskey notes that we're kind of looking for here. I don't know how much that idea transferred into the final product, but I mean, the logic was there at least. The last thing before we begin is set up your smoking system to create an ideal malt smoking environment. You want tinfoil on the grates to hold the malt, and you want a wet tray underneath to help keep the environment from drying out too quickly. Lastly, you want to smoke your malts indirectly through a cold smoke system. If you don't have a cold smoke rig, there are methods in my other video on how to configure direct heat smokers and grills into cold smoke setups. Cold smoking helps infuse the malt with all the flavor and aroma that you want, while also keeping the temperature low enough to prevent burning, so it's definitely worth the effort and money in my opinion. So let's get into it. We light the charcoal and we add our soaked wood once ashy. We're looking to maintain a cooler temperature here between 85 and 130 degrees Fahrenheit, so don't add too much fuel to the fire. For this session, I used oak, applewood, and cherrywood for some unique smoky blends differing from the traditional beechwood. And once the conditions are right and you got a heavy smoke going, add your malts to the smoker. I like to place the pale malts down low and the specialty malts more likely to burn on higher shelves. I then monitor and control the smoker settings for about an hour each batch, and then rinse and repeat until you've got your entire malt bill smoked. And speaking of the malt bill, I try to follow a traditional Munich style Marzen for the base malts with some of my own non-traditional flair for the specialty malts. I used around 4 pounds each of Munich 1 and 2, 2 pounds of Munich 3 for a little bit of a darker, richer vibe, and about a half pound of non-bittered chocolate malt for sweetness and color. And touching on the color aspect of it, I have questions on whether or not the actual color of some of these beers come from darker kiln malts, or if they pick up the actual darkness from the near burning, scorching aspect of the smoking process. It's still something that I'm a bit iffy on, but I didn't want to take a risk on it. I knew it was going to come out slightly darker anyway, but I really wanted that chocolate vibe to really tie everything together and certainly give me the darker color. All in all, this recipe is nothing too fancy, but I think it helped the finished product excel in its simplicity by allowing the smoke to be the center of attention. Now the prep is done and the malt is smoked, let's start the actual brew day. I'm using my Klarsteiner all-in-one system as a mash tun with a coffee percolator as a hot liquor tank for sparging, since this system doesn't have a pump. I mashed in at around 165 degrees Fahrenheit, which dropped the temp to around 155, where I maintained the temp for an hour. The wort was absolutely gorgeous and made the entire house smell like barbecue from the intense smoke. It was everything I was hoping it would be. I then transferred it into my mash and boil system for the boil kettle. Yeah, I know it's a bit redundant to use so many all-in-one systems for one beer, but the simple fact of the matter is some of them do better at certain jobs than others. So yes, I know it defeats the purpose, but it gets the job done and, I'm happy with it. The boil was pretty uneventful, but there were several moments where I thought boil over was imminent, but luckily it was cooperative. All in all, the boil lasted about 60 minutes. I could have let it boil down a little bit longer to develop a little bit more of a complex character in the malt, but I was a little bit worried about how much wort I had actually collected from the mash, so I just kept it short and simple. I added 3 1-ounce hop additions of Saz at the 0-minute, 30-minute, and 60-minute mark to add some earthiness and mild spicy notes with a very subtle bitterness. I hit it with the wort chiller, transferred it to my fermentation vessel, and pitched my starter of Bavarian lager yeast. I then transferred the whole thing into my kegerator to allow cold fermentation for 90 days at around 54 degrees. I was a bit worried here, but luckily I saw visible signs of fermentation around day 2. Fermentation was sluggish, but around the end of the 3rd month, everything had been stable for some time, so I felt it was ready to keg. I transferred it over and hit it with the CO2 and was absolutely blown away by the final product. Aesthetically, it was everything I wanted, dark and calm with thick, creamy head. The body was medium with light carbonation and so damn quaffable. The aroma and flavor was everything I dreamed of. The smoke was assertive without being too dominant, and it wasn't certainly not as intense as the professional offerings, but still enjoyable and incapable of being overlooked. The whiskey was subtle and played well with the sweetness of the chocolate malts, and this was my absolute favorite beer I've ever brewed. All the hard work and risks I took paid off, and I made something I'm truly proud of. I don't say this often about my homebrews, but this beer achieved true balance and came out exactly how I envisioned it. I love this beer. So thank you very much for accompanying me on this journey, and thank you for watching. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate all the support I've gotten lately. So thank you all very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there's a story in every bottle and that life is beautiful. Cheers.